Hi guys, I'm a Forester here, and today I'm going to share with you the best way that I know of to cook the perfect ribeye steak. Now for years and years I thought the best way to cook a ribeye was over charcoal outside, but it wasn't until maybe 4 or 5 years ago that I began experimenting with bringing the steaks inside, pan frying them, and baking them in the oven. But what we've come to conclude is that's the way we like the steak the best. And as a result, we would much prefer to cook it here ourselves than to go out and eat at a steak restaurant. It's not that hard, it's not that complicated, but there are some specific steps that I go through. So let's go to the countertop and I'll show you what I do. Here are the ingredients that I use, and of course the most important thing is the meat itself. I also use some kosher salt, some extra virgin olive oil, and also some Montreal steak seasoning that I buy at Costco. The most important thing, as I said, is the meat, and I buy my steaks from Costco. I really like the quality of the steaks there, and they come at a good price. You can see these were $9.99 a pound. I usually buy 4 packs of steaks, and I can usually pick through them and find some that I think are well marbled. I do have to look out for one thing, and that's the thickness of the steak. These are right at 1 3/4 inches thick, and I found that I have a little more trouble cooking them just right if they're over 1 1/2 inches thick. 1 1/2 inches thick is ideal for me. When they get up to 2 inches, it's hard to have it cooked evenly. But one thing I do is I bring them out early and let them sit on the counter and warm up to room temperature before I start cooking. Now I'll be pan frying those steaks in this cast iron skillet for a couple of minutes before I put them in the oven. And one of the most important things is to have this eye on high and that cast iron skillet extra hot. Okay, so after browning the steak, they'll go into the oven, and so early on in the process I preheat the oven, I turn it on bake, and set the temperature to 500 degrees. And then I give it plenty of time to preheat before I get started. The oven has preheated, and I don't know if I mentioned it, but I heat up the skillet inside the oven so that I know it's 500 degrees. I put it on the eye. Let me reposition the camera. And I'll zoom in there a little bit. So I put it on the eye. The eye is hot, and I'm going to put the steak in the skillet, and I'm going to start my stopwatch for 1 minute, starting now. It doesn't put out all that much heat, or excuse me, it doesn't put out all that much smoke. There's no extra oil, as I mentioned, in the frying pan. One thing you have to be careful is that skillet is 500 degrees since it was in the oven, and you want to be extra careful not to touch it. I've burned myself more than once. Okay, 37 seconds have gone by. This is a pretty quick process. It's 1 minute on one side, then I'm going to flip it over, do it for a minute on the other side. Okay, and it's been 1 minute. One thing you have to be careful about is not to splatter yourself with grease when you flip it over. Okay, we'll let it go 1 more minute. I'm going to cut the video and I'll come back to you in a second. Okay, it's just turned 2 minutes, 1 minute on each side. And now something I do like to do is to stand it on edge. And I won't leave it on edge too long, but I like to stand it on edge and just brown the edges also. and I don't have to do that. It's just something I do. I almost grabbed that skillet with my bare hands. I'm going to reposition the camera first. And put the skillet straight into the oven. As I said, the oven's set on 500 degrees. And now I'm going to reset my stopwatch. And I'm going to leave it in there for 7 minutes. Alright, it's been 7 minutes, so it's time to take the skillet out of the oven. And we're just going to flip it, being careful not to splatter ourselves. Look at that nice golden brown. And then back into the oven for another 7 minutes. Alright, it's been 14 minutes, so let's turn the oven off. Go ahead and take the skillet out. I'm going to leave that oven open. And that thing is hot. Let me turn the camera and give you a close-up of the steak. And I'll zoom in a little bit. Doesn't that look good? Okay, let me show you what I do with it now. Okay, I just took the steaks out of the oven and now I'm going to drive them to work. And so I made this little basket. They'll continue cooking, and I put a little platform there so they won't be sitting in their own juices. And then I'll cover it with tinfoil. Okay, let's see if we can get these out and hit the road. And there was a lot of juice came out of those steaks. Okay, set that one and then this one on top of it. Alright, then I'm going to cover these up. And hopefully they'll still be warm by the time I get to the office. Okay, what I do is take the steak. I don't want it to cook in its own juices, so I take the steak, I drain some of the excess juice off, and then I set it on top of this bowl that's been turned upside down on a plate. Then I take a piece of aluminum foil and I make a tent over it so it doesn't cool off too much. But I'm going to let it continue cooking like this for about 5 minutes. Then I'll slice it and show you the final results. Okay, it's time to slice up the steak, and the knife that I use to do my steak cutting is this Layoil. You've seen this in videos before. I love that scroll work. I keep this thing sharp and I sharpen it right before we have steak. This has become my steak knife. So we'll take the tent off. It's still extra warm. And you can see a lot of the fluids that drained off the steak and onto the bowl or onto the plate. It's still red inside. Okay, we'll put it right there. One steak is enough for my wife and I. And by the way, the 2 steaks that I packed away, I cut them, sliced them up at work so that they were hot and fresh. And now I'm going to start cutting it like this. Now I like my steak medium well, and what I found with these extra thick cuts it's hard to get the whole thing uniform. This one seems like it's a little redder than what I normally cook it. But we're going to go ahead and try it just like it is. Yeah. That's a little redder than what I normally fix it, but that's fine. It seems tender. I'll finish cutting this up in a second, but I want to show you the secret that I mentioned, because when you season your meat, you're basically seasoning it on the outer edge. When you cut it, you have so much more surface area that hasn't received any seasoning at all, salt. So I don't do a lot, but I do, once I've sliced it, I do go over it and put just a little bit more salt on the cut surfaces. And that seems to bring out a lot more flavor. I'll go ahead and cut up the rest of it, and then I'll take a picture of the final meal.